The world of Joyce Meyer is collapsing. Her sibling was first discovered dead in a building that had been abandoned. Her security guard then killed his wife and kids. After 20 years, she has now lost her largest platform due to a horrifying cover-up of child abuse. The pastor who had endured years of her father's sexual abuse was at her breaking point. Millions of admirers are asking whether this is the end for America's most adored preacher after the tragic series of events. Joyce Meyer's life took a turn for the worst when she was a little child. When her father returned from World War II, he brought fear rather than safety. From the time she was very young until the day she left home at the age of 18, he sexually abused her. She said he had sexually assaulted her more than 200 times. But the agony wasn't the only thing she experienced. He also deceived her by telling her that it was unique and that he loved her for it. After forcing her to view porn, he inquired about her feelings. Despite the fact that she detested it, she had to appear to like it. It was always a source of worry to live with him. Everything was governed by his moods. She had no idea what would trigger him, or when he would blow up. Even more painful was the fact that her mother was aware. Joyce claimed that forgiving her mother was more difficult than forgiving her father. Her mother didn't say anything, didn't stop it, and didn't shield her. She was too terrified of the repercussions to confront her spouse. Joyce was left feeling scared, abandoned, and without a place to call home. Such treachery is deeply ingrained. Not only was there abuse, but there was also quiet and acting as if nothing was happening. Although no one discussed sexual assault at the time, her mother subsequently informed her that she simply couldn't handle the controversy, which didn't make it any easier to swallow. Joyce was nevertheless able to perform well academically. She pretended to be a typical girl while wearing a mask every day. She made up excuses for why she was unable to attend parties or remain after school. She led a double life, seeming well organized on the outside but collapsing on the inside. She was humiliated and lonely. She is embarrassed of her father, ashamed of herself, and worried that someone would discover the truth. Even after leaving home, she continued to feel lonely for a long time. However, she eventually used the lessons she learned to persevere in the face of pain to assist others. She first learned about God when she was 9 years old, and although she didn't think it would ease her suffering, she frequently questioned why God hadn't saved her or put an end to the torture. She battled for years to believe in a loving God who remained silent in her darkest hours, but she persisted. She might say something startling later in life, and she was really happy it had happened. She felt stronger because of it, not because it was acceptable. She had the courage to assist others as a result, but it took time to achieve that type of tranquility. Before she got there, she had to go through years of mending, inquiring, and searching. She believed that marriage would be her escape at the age of 18. In an attempt to break free from her father's control, she married a part-time car salesman immediately after graduating from high school. However, it was again another ruse. Her new spouse was disloyal, domineering, and manipulative. She experienced a series of nightmares. In order to pay for a trip, he even persuaded her to take payroll checks from her employer. Joyce returned the money with interest years later, but the embarrassment remained. The situation worsened. He left her for another woman while she was 5 months pregnant. Joyce was just 22 years old, alone, and expecting a kid. She was forced to return to her parents' house, which was the very location from which she had attempted to flee. She was at her lowest at the period. She struggled with despair, felt unworthy, and even thought of ending her life. However, things started to change. She began returning to her religion, but it was a deeper, more genuine faith than the superficial one she had as a youngster. In 1966, the marriage came to a formal halt. She was broken, and 23. She began drinking and frequenting bars in an attempt to dull the agony. She wandered between brief relationships with guys she hardly knew, seeking solace in the wrong places. She once claimed to feel empty, as though she was attempting to fill an unfillable void. Even though that phase lasted for around 6 months, it demonstrated how lost she was. In 1966, Joyce Meyer met Dave Meyer at the age of 23. She was a young divorcee who was burdened by a traumatic history, years of father abuse, and a failed first marriage. She was attempting to escape reality at the Merry-Go-Round pub in St. Louis, but she was not searching for love. However, Dave entered that evening. He didn't go out to bars. He seldom ever went somewhere like that. In fact, he was simply drawn there by something. And something snapped when he saw Joyce. Dave persisted, even though she showed no interest at all, before she ultimately consented to go out with him. He phoned her 37 times. Their bond quickly strengthened. They were married in less than 9 months. Even still, Joyce was unable to respond when Dave declared his love for her. She had no idea what true love felt like. Marriage didn't make anything better. There was a great deal of fury that Joyce brought, the type that doesn't remain silent. She used to say that she was always ready to blow up and was loaded for bear. She would become upset about the simplest things. An 8-hour yelling marathon would start if there was a sock on the ground. She previously ignored Dave for 39 days in a row, only speaking to him via written notes. She hurled a frozen chicken at him once more. The damage in the wall remained for years, even though it missed. Even though Joyce kept note of 37 previous arguments to use against him, Dave remained composed the entire time. Dave refused to leave even though their marriage was on the verge of disintegrating on many occasions. He was really patient. Then the time arrived when things began to change. June 22, 1978, was the date. 11 years have passed since their marriage. Joyce had just concluded another outburst that lasted 6 hours. "I've done everything I can to keep you happy, but it's clear you're determined to be unhappy," Dave remarked, glancing at her. "I will thus continue to enjoy my life." The words struck her like a flash of lightning. She saw herself clearly for the first time. She claimed that it was as if scales had fallen out of her eyes. She began attending therapy sessions. She discovered she had 17 distinct personality disorders at that point. 99.7% of husbands would have left, according to her therapist. Dave hadn't though. Joyce's transformation and ultimately her ministry began at that very moment. It was not simpler to raise a family. Daniel, Sandra, Laura, and David were their 4 children. Every child arrived in the midst of a storm. When David was born, Joyce was still struggling with her inner demons. Laura's parents had been apart for 26 days before she came. Joyce was hospitalized for 3 months due to severe postpartum depression at the time of Sandra's birth, and Daniel arrived just as they were drowning in debt. $37,000. Dave managed to keep his composure somehow. What about the children? Every one of them was unique. David possessed Joyce's fervor. Like Dave, Laura was composed. Sandra was considerate and caring. Daniel exuded enthusiasm and vitality. There were more than 1,200 fights in the first 15 years due to the large number of conflicting personalities. However, such hardships strengthened them, and more unified than they had previously realized. Joyce Meyer was driving home after a straightforward hair appointment in 1976 when it all started. She was experiencing a lot of spiritual turmoil and frustration at the time. She begged God for answers while sitting by herself in her car. She remarked, "There must be more." Then an event occurred that would permanently alter her. She could clearly hear God respond to her. "You've been learning patience from me." She had an overwhelming sensation that she could only describe as being filled with liquid love. She was still affected that evening when she was at a bowling alley. It seemed as though God had opened her up and filled her spirit with love. She couldn't ignore the fire that was ignited inside her by that encounter. She quickly established a little Bible study at work. It was only a modest get-together with a few co-workers, but it quickly grew. Something about her teaching style was unique. She was honest, forthright, and unvarnished. Scripture was not the only reason people came. They sought solace, hope, and solutions. This wasn't simply her idea, Joyce thought. She claimed to have received a direct call from God. "You will spread my word everywhere you go." That little Bible study was only the start. Her path did not follow a straight path. It actually had some bumps on the road. Because her Lutheran church did not allow women to teach the Bible, she departed. She tried another church, but her skills made the pastor feel too intimidated. Eventually, that church closed. Nevertheless, she continued. She discovered Life Christian Church in St. Louis in 1982. With only 30 members, the congregation was having difficulty surviving. Small numbers, however, were not visible to Joyce. She recognized a chance. At the time, finances were tight. Joyce believed that God wanted her to devote herself full-time to studying the Bible, so she resigned her work. At home, things were difficult because of that choice. But she continued. She found a space to develop, instruct, and ultimately find acceptance at Life Christian Church. Rick Shelton, the pastor there, immediately recognized something in her. Her lack of seminary background didn't bother him. Her enthusiasm and her ability to connect with others were what counted. Occasionally he asked her to cover for him, and he formally declared it in 1980. She was promoted to associate pastor. The scope of her Bible studies skyrocketed. The number of attendees rapidly increased from 150 to around 500 women, who now attend 3 times a week. Individuals were being changed, not merely listening. Her voice had returned. Joyce felt compelled to leave the confines of the religion. By 1983, she had been exposed to radio by Pastor Shelton, and she adored it. Thus, she made a bold move. She started her own show, Life in the Word, and purchased airtime on 6 stations in the Midwest. It began modestly. She used cassettes of her church sermons to capture occurrences. She even taped from her son's closet once she became independent. However, many were paying attention. Her candor, her straightforwardness, and her readiness to discuss suffering. She stood out because of these things. The portion of her tale that many pastors would have kept secret then arrived. Joyce started talking about her background, including the trauma she had experienced as a youngster. She said that she had been sexually molested by her father from the time she was 5 until she moved out at the age of 18. It was unlike anything people were hearing in churches, terrifying, and intensely personal. She didn't hold back though. She thought that if she had survived it, then so had others. Furthermore, God could cure them if He could heal her. That transparency fostered trust. She wasn't acting like she had everything together. She was recovering, surviving, and assisting others in doing the same. She left Life Christian Church in 1985 to launch her own ministry. It's called Life in the Word, which is also the name of her radio program. This was not only a religious action, it was calculated. Now she was in complete control of her message, and could openly discuss recovery, hope, and abuse. Her following continued to expand, particularly among women who saw in her a sympathetic person who shared their suffering. Next was television. Dave, her husband, advised her to make the leap in 1993. She was able to get airtime on WGN and BET, 2 important networks. WGN touched individuals all around the country. She was able to reach Black viewers through BET, who hadn't always seen themselves represented in Christian mainstream media. People could experience the enthusiasm of her gatherings from the comfort of their own homes thanks to the broadcast's usage of live footage from her conferences. She thought it was time for a new moniker as her TV ministry expanded. It was more than just a title change when Life in the Word changed to Enjoying Everyday Life. The message had changed. Joyce wanted everyone to understand that religion wasn't limited to Sundays. It may influence their daily experiences, every happiness, and every hardship. And her message grew along with her reach. She started giving lessons on prosperity, showing how kindness and trust might bring about serenity, health, and yes, even success. A significant turning point in her career came when her visage was featured on the cover of Charisma magazine in 1998. She was dubbed the most popular woman minister in America. For her and any women who had ever been told they couldn't preach, that acknowledgement meant a great deal. Unable to instruct or lead. However, Joyce's flair was what really made her stand out. She never professed to be flawless. While on stage, she cracked jokes. She acknowledged that at difficult times she was honest about her background, including the abuse and the resentment she had harbored for years. In her 1995 book Beauty for Ashes, she detailed how God had transformed the most ugly aspects of her life into something lovely. Sounding pious wasn't the goal. It was about being authentic. Joyce Meyer's ministry was not only expanding but also blowing up in the late 1990s. A little religious group has grown into a significant organization. The evidence. In Fenton, Missouri, they relocated to a brand new $20 million headquarters. This was a message rather than merely an office. It was the primary center for their 9 overseas operations and employed about 400 workers. The structure itself demonstrated their progress. It included opulent features including a $23,000 antique commode and a $30,000 green malachite table. It was condemned by others, who said it appeared more like a rich company than a place of worship. Joyce, however, did not slow down. The ministry was only getting started and continued to expand. The Dream Center followed. It was established in St. Louis in 2000 by Joyce and her husband Dave. The place was more than a church. It was a location where those in need might receive genuine assistance. They provided haircuts, bathing, clothing, and food. They assisted males in their addiction recovery. They provided after-school programs for children. It was everything done with decency and care. Clothes have to be whole, free, and clean. Every morning the food was ready and hot. For individuals like Decala Bean, it was a game changer. She recovered hope after experiencing homelessness and addiction. The Dream Center evolved into more than just a structure under the leadership of pastors Tony Ayala and Jeff Allensworth. It turned into a location where people restored their lives. At the same time, a significant event was taking place elsewhere. David Meyer, Joyce's son, assisted in spearheading a brand new initiative called Hand of Hope. The ministry used this as a means of assisting people worldwide. It began modestly. Missions received just 10% of their revenue. However, it was not the case. They were providing food for more than 22 million people in 26 nations by 2023. They treated thousands of people. After calamities, they hurried in to aid survivors. They provided care for around 375,000 people over the years. Additionally, more than 129,000 people made the decision to follow Christ throughout this time. In countries like Thailand, Greece, Ukraine, and South Africa, they also established rehabilitation houses for victims of human trafficking, constructed clinics, and supplied clean water to villages. The work simply continued to grow. Joyce wrote a book in 1995 that would alter things long before any of this. Battlefield of the Mind was the title. The message was straightforward but impactful. Our ideas are important, and we have power over them. The novel touched a nerve. It resonated with people all throughout the world. Sold more than 7 million copies, subsequently declared it to be the most significant book she had ever written. In 2025, a new version that has been upgraded for a new generation will be released. The book addressed actual difficulties, anxiety, fear, rage, sadness, and provided hope via religion. Joyce became more than just a preacher as a result. She became a reliable voice for those battling mental issues as a result, and her writing was only getting started. She has authored almost 150 novels since then. Daily devotionals are among them. Others focus on Bible study or personal development. In September 2024, her most recent book, Mornings with God, was published. She even signed a big publisher to a $10 million agreement. Her writings, which have been translated into more than 160 languages, have been read by people worldwide. There have been almost 39 million copies sold. What About Me? Her upcoming book will be number 151. Her works went on to become blockbusters. Readers gave several people excellent marks. However, they all conveyed the same message. Faith may assist you in changing your life. Joyce Meyer's name appeared all over in 2003, not only because of her teachings, but also due to a startling news report. A thorough examination into her ministry had been published in a St. Louis newspaper. However, her life was more important than her sermons. The report spoke about her husband's $107,000 silver Mercedes, her $2 million mansion, and her $10 million plane. In addition, each of her 4 children owned a $500,000 home. $20 million was spent on the ministry's headquarters. Additionally, it included expensive technology, artwork, and exquisite furnishings valued at over $5 million. Donations from followers who felt they were supporting Christian work rather than a lavish lifestyle were used to fund everything. The public's response was swift and forceful. Following the story's publication, Wall Watchers, a Christian watchdog group, requested that the IRS investigate Meyer's expenditures. When Meyer's ministry was added to a list of 6 televangelists under investigation by Senator Chuck Grassley in 2007, the situation became even more dire. His team was interested in how nonprofit ministries could afford items like a $23,000 antique chest or a $30,000 circular table made of malachite. They inquired about pricey religious artwork, a $14,000 handmade bookshelf, and even cosmetic surgery. They insisted on explanations, receipts, and evidence of appropriate use of funds. As the criticism grew, Meyer changed in 2004. She stated that she would accept a lower government salary. She would make less money instead of $900,000 annually. But there was a catch. The majority of the proceeds from her book sales, which she had previously given back to the ministry, would suddenly be hers. This implied that she would get all of the money made from the sale of her books, whether in person or online. Although she was officially making less from the ministry itself, her team acknowledged that this change would probably result in an increase in her personal income. Meyer's ministry was working to improve its reputation. By 2009, it became a member of a financial accountability committee that Billy Graham established to ensure that Christian groups adhered to stringent guidelines. This organization sought annual audits, verified that there were independent board members, and examined their finances. Unlike those that refused to comply, Joyce Meyer Ministries passed every exam. They were able to regain some of the public's faith by promising greater openness and publishing annual reports. Meyer also started to modify her message as the years passed. She made an admission in 2019 that shocked many. She said that she had gone too far in her previous preaching on faith and money. She formerly had the opinion that a person's illness or issues were a sign that they lacked sufficient faith. She realized now that was untrue. There is no assurance in the Bible that we would never face difficulties. She stated plainly, it was an uncommon instance of public contemplation. Others, such as Benny Hinn, have likewise stopped advocating that riches was a guarantee of faith. Nevertheless, detractors noted that Meyer's lavish lifestyle persisted in spite of this shift in tone. A personal catastrophe followed. Meyer would never forget the call she got in December 2010. In Los Angeles, her brother David had been discovered dead in an abandoned structure. Before anyone found the body, he had been there for almost a month. It was an unpleasant experience. David had battled drug use for years, beginning when he was in the Marines. He had even attempted to get well via a church program at one time, but he gave up and returned to living on the streets. At a conference, Meyer discussed his death and used it to highlight the distinction between two paths, one of discipline and one of despair. During what should have been a happy time of year, a difficult message was sent. She was given her brother's remains, his ashes, a little bag of belongings, a pocket knife, an empty wallet, a broken watch, and a keychain. A few days later, she held them up as she carried them to the stage. "My personal effects and his personal effects are sadly different," she said. People were asked to consider their own life, their decisions, and how they would be remembered in a dramatic fashion. She noticed the shattered watch in particular. Meyer took it as a sign that David was out of time. In her sermons, she kept telling this tale. She expressed her belief that David would have wished for her to utilize his life to teach others a valuable lesson. Both of them had come from a shattered household. Both of them experienced trauma. However, one had succeeded while the other had failed miserably. She claimed that whereas David consistently avoided his suffering, she accepted responsibility for hers. It turned into a central theme of her speech. If you make the proper decisions, nobody, not even the devil, can prevent you from achieving your goals. However, the way she exploited her brother's death made several people uncomfortable. It appeared to them that she was highlighting her accomplishment by exploiting his failure. However, things could have felt different behind the scenes. According to those close to her, she occasionally felt guilty about David, who passed away destitute while she lived well. He lived on the streets while she traveled on private planes. She might have questioned if she might have done more to assist him, but she had made an effort. The timing was particularly challenging. Just following Christmas, she publicly shared a narrative about decisions and their effects, even though her ministry was often about family and thankfulness. In private, she could have been struggling with a far more difficult reality, that life isn't always easy, that addiction and suffering don't always have clear-cut roots, and that sometimes, despite our best efforts, we are unable to help the people we care about. Something unexpected occurred in January 2025 that rocked the Christian television industry. One of the most famous televangelists, Joyce Meyer, made the decision to discontinue her daily show, Enjoying Everyday Life, on the Daystar television network. This choice wasn't made at random. It put an end to an almost two-decade partnership. Since 2005, her show has played a significant role in Daystar, reaching millions of viewers worldwide. Why did she go? The response was connected to an unpleasant and terrible circumstance. A journalist called Julie Royce released her investigation near the end of 2024. It came to light that Joni Lamb, the president of Daystar, was accused of concealing abuse of her own 5-year-old granddaughter. According to the allegations, a male family member who also worked at Daystar was engaged in the abuse, which took place between 2020 and 2021. According to the child's father, Jonathan Lamb, and his wife, Susie, Joni was aware of it but chose to keep it a secret. They also charged her with financial and spiritual misconduct. Texas police launched an inquiry, but Daystar vehemently rejected all of the allegations. Joyce Meyer didn't remain quiet either. Her group took a risk and put on a spectacular performance. The choice was quite emotive inside her ministry. Joyce's son, Dan Meyer, who is a ministry leader, addressed a letter to the workers outlining their reasoning. He said that because Joyce herself had endured years of abuse as a kid, the accusations were too personal. "We have a great obligation to defend the truth and provide room for its discovery," Dan wrote. He said that a lot of their viewers were already contacting them out of concern about the situation. This instance demonstrated unusual openness for a ministry that often maintains strict control over its message. They did not, however, shut the door entirely. They stated that if the problem was appropriately fixed, they might visit Daystar again in the future. Walking away wasn't simple, though. A sizable broadcast platform and potentially millions of dollars were lost as a result of the decision. A ministry may have to pay up to $15,000 each episode to air a show on Daystar every day. Joyce Meyer wasn't the only one who left, but that quickly mounts up over a year. Jesse Duplantis and Jack Graham, two well-known figures in Christian radio, also severed their connections with Daystar. There were more. The dispute caused some to depart. Others had already left because they believed the network's leadership lacked moral character. By claiming that these adjustments were typical around contract renewal time, Daystar attempted to defuse the situation. Although they claimed that other shows were prepared to cover the voids, their public discussion of the subject demonstrated that they were under pressure. Although the previous instance was somewhat different, Joyce Meyer Ministries has before been connected to controversy. Something really terrible happened back in 2009. After killing his wife and 2 small boys, Christopher Coleman, Joyce Meyer's chief of security, was taken into custody. Their Illinois home is where their remains were discovered. Coleman had set up the murder scene to give the impression that it had been committed by someone who was upset about Joyce Meyer's ministry. Threatening slogans were even spray-painted on the walls by him. However, police quickly learned the truth. Coleman and his wife's best friend had been having an affair. A divorce may have lost him his career, but he didn't want one. He decided to murder his family instead. Even more unsettling information was discovered throughout the inquiry. Coleman had been threatening himself with false messages for months before to the killings. Because of his profession, he was trying to give the impression that someone was trying to harm him. In his own mailbox, he even left a menacing letter. After growing concerned, a neighbor installed a camera to monitor the mailbox. Coleman's wife, Sherry, had assured acquaintances that her husband would be held accountable if she ever died. Joyce Meyer testified on tape when Coleman was put on trial in 2011. She said she was unaware of the romance and had no reason to believe anything was amiss. A jury convicted Coleman of all 3 murders on the 2nd anniversary of the deaths. He received a life sentence without the possibility of release. Meyer claimed to have prayed for Coleman and to be completely cooperative.